So I am so thrilled and honored to welcome André Aciman and Matthew Yazzie to our virtual silent book club tonight. André, as you all know, is the author of 8 novels, I believe, maybe more. Hold on, André, you're gonna have to unmute you too. That would be important. Let me just get this working. Can you do it on your end? There you go. And Matt, can you unmute on your end? Perfect. All right. So André is the author of 8 novels. He is a professor of comparative literature in New York, and originally was born in Alexandria, Egypt, but now lives in New York City. Tonight, we are going to be talking about 2 of his books, Call Me By Your Name and Find Me. As I'm sure all of you know, Call Me By Your Name was adapted to a film, which received multiple Academy Award nominations, one for Best Adapted Screenplay, and the book also won a Lambda Award for the Best Gay Fiction. So we are really excited to be here with André, celebrating on the last day of Pride Month. And I will leave that there because there are so many more accolades that we could go through. But I do want to also introduce Matthew, who is an equality advocate. He is a diversity and inclusion expert. He's worked with many technology companies in the Bay Area. He's based in Oakland. And he also started up a diversity book club. And so he is a reader close to our hearts. So Matthew and André, I'm going to let you guys take it away. And thank you both for being here.
Great, thank you, Guinevere and André. Good to see you again.
Hi, Matthew. Hi.
Yeah, so I just want to start out by asking, how have you been coping? I mean, we'll just state the obvious. How have you been coping with the entire quarantine situation so far?
Well, one is supposed to lament the fact that I don't see my friends. I don't have dinners with them. I don't have drinks with them. So in essence, I'm very isolated, except for my family. But otherwise, the single unexpected advantage of all this is that I get to sit at home and write all day long, which is, it's not a great thing to do if you're a writer even, but there it is. I write all day long and it can become exhausting, but I don't know what else to do with my time. So that's what I do.
And I guess that brings up kind of a great question one of our readers had is what inspires you to write, or where do you kind of find your ideas for writing?
That's a good question. I saw that question and I don't have an answer for it because something just pops in my mind, and I say, oh, that's an interesting thought. And then I explore it a bit, or I'll start writing because that's the only way I can test anything is by writing about it. And sometimes it takes off. It has a life of its own. You go from one scene to another scene to one dialogue to another. And the next thing you know, you've got 5 pages. It could be absolute trash, so you throw them out. Or it could be, oh, that's the beginning of something. But there is no single origin or source that I can actually verify. It's just something that pops in your head. Sometimes it's only a moment of dialogue, like a sentence that somebody says, that is so arresting that I'll say, okay, I'll take that sentence. Now, where do we go? Oh, I don't know. So it's always experimenting. That's all it is. I have no idea where I'm going. I'm not the kind of writer who writes outlines and so on. So, and I don't do any research. So.
And can you talk to a little bit about the evolution then of Call Me By Your Name, and how did that initially start and sort of snowball into what it became?
Well, it started because I've said this. I was looking at a calendar, one of those calendars that has images, and on one of the images was a house in Bordighera. I had no idea where Bordighera was, but I liked the house and I liked Monet, so it made sense. And suddenly I said, gee, I wish I could live in that house. Forget that. Then I was supposed to go to Italy that summer. We didn't go to Italy for a variety of reasons. And so I had this kind of the house in Italy. I wanted to be there. So I said, I'm going to write a story about a house in Italy. That's it. And I said, I'm going to just begin with the car arriving. And the next thing I knew is instead of, I was going to do boy girl, but then that just fell off the wagon right away because there was no difficulty in boy girl. I wanted something that has a bit of tension. And I thought, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to have two guys. And it's going to be difficult. It's not going to be totally smooth. There's going to be tension. There's going to be reluctance, inhibition, and so on. And I needed those to write. I always need inhibition in a character, fundamentally because I think we're all of us, however freed we think we are, we're all inhibited.
And you focused very specifically on the characters and that interpersonal relationship between them as opposed to external forces. In 2007 as well, it wasn't, you didn't tackle some of the other issues that may have been going on at the time, but choosing primarily just the relationships themselves. Were you surprised at how that was received by some individuals?
Yes, I was surprised. I mean, it was very well received. I mean, that's the good part. I mean, it could have been rejected outright. For one thing, I'm not a realist. In fact, I don't like realist writing. In other words, there was always plot. There's always external events, things that happened. The car skidded off the road. There was an act. I don't do any of that stuff. I just like to have two characters, three characters, sitting in a room, talking to each other, examining each other, not saying what they really mean, scared of each other, but at the same time, maybe attracted. And I like that sort of dynamo that begins to oscillate between two characters or three. And that's what I write about. I'm sort of, so I was writing about that, and I didn't want to bring in all the, what I call sort of the villains of any kind of story about gay men, basically the bullying, the mocking, the violence, the death threats, the threats themselves, the parents who repudiate the children. I said, enough of this. We've seen it. We know what it happens. It will probably happen for a long time, but I didn't want that in. And which brings me to mention another little factoid that was important to me. I wrote a novel about New York during Christmas time. And one of the reviewers said, this man wrote about New York and he doesn't even mention 9/11. I was in New York at 9/11.
Yeah.
I know what happened because my kids were in school and I had to rescue all of them.
Yeah.
So I know, but when I was writing the novel, it was extraneous. It didn't matter to the man and the woman who meet at a party. They're not going to discuss 9/11. They will talk about a movie director. That's what they'll talk about.
Mm-hmm. And you're referring to Eight White Nights, is that correct?
Yes, correct. Yes. Oh, wow.
Which I just finished reading, which was again reading through the second time. But that was another beautiful book. I certainly would recommend as well. How do you when you found out about Call Me by Your Name potentially becoming a film? What sort of went through your process in thinking about how these words would translate and letting go of that into working with people that you would trust to be able to tell this story?
When they said that they wanted to do a film, I mean, that happened, in 2008 or 2009, I can't remember. So until 2016, there was nothing made, nothing even scripted as far as I know. So it took forever. But at the beginning, I was excited, they're going to make a movie out of my book. Oh, that's great, And I figured, and they always had like a whole slew of directors, slew of script writers. Each one said they were interested and they had to back out because they had other things. So I just felt, I've had my say. I've written my book, up to them to do what they want to do. I won't get upset. I will let them do whatever they want to do. It turns out that although there were some plot changes in the story, I mean, there wasn't that much plot to begin with. It really, they kind of adhered to the spirit of the book, and they captured the joy of a relationship, the fact that nobody is tormented about having a gay relationship, that there was something actually beautiful about having a relationship during the summer in Italy, of all places, and the parents are not even against it themselves. So that happened in the movie, it happened in the book. some of the other details were sort of eliminated, no big deal. I was very happy with how it happened, but I didn't get involved in it. I made one recommendation, and they accepted it right away, and I was very happy. So.
Nice. And yeah, would you say that what valuable lessons or surprises did you find in that process of James Avery adapting that story?
I didn't adapt it. They did that.
Okay.
I arrived on the scene. They were filming a scene that was taken right out of the book. So I felt, oh, they're filming the book. I even know what they're about to say. In fact, they were saying it. So I was very happy, but I didn't get involved in the making of the film or in the screenwriting, the screenplay and so on. I didn't know who the actors were. I mean, I don't go to the movies that much, so I didn't know much. But I knew who James Avery was, and I had seen a film by Luca Guadagnino, and I loved it. So I said, they've got the two best people. So I was very happy. I let them do what they wanted to do.
Speaking of which, towards the end of Call Me by Your Name, you leave Samuel by giving Elio what I believe is one of the most beautiful passages I've ever read. And as a result, and unsurprisingly, a bit of a deification, I think, ended up being formed about Samuel in his life around these beautiful, poignant words. But in Find Me, we jump immediately into Samuel's sort of first-person experience, flaws and everything. Why did you choose to take this approach when you decided to write Find Me?
You're assuming I made a decision. It was not really a decision. I just started writing. I was on a train and I met this woman who was sitting right next to me with her dog. She was going to see her father. He was a very sick man. And she got off the train 2 stops later, so we barely had a conversation. But it inspired me. I said, this is interesting. This is exactly where sometimes you go to life and life gives you the little seedling that you needed, and the rest is all your work. But I liked the scene, and so I started with a man on a train. I had no idea who he was. But then when I realized that he's going to visit his son, and I said, oh, maybe his son could be Elio. Oh, wow, that makes sense. And then I had the character of the father sort of begin to blossom after what had inspired me, which was basically his speech. And I wanted to find out, as I'm writing, what kind of a man is he? Uh, what kind of a man would give such a speech and feel totally comfortable giving his son a speech like that? Not many fathers are capable of that.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky because my father would have given a speech like that, and many times he did give speeches along those lines.
But we don't get a sense of the history kind of and we've taken it upon ourselves as the reader to ascribe all of these personality traits and his past relationships. And so did you find that readers found it jarring then to have someone so exposed then in his personal experience and how he described his journey?
Well, basically all readers have said the same thing, and it has been wonderful hearing what the readers, because their initial reaction was sort of surprise, maybe even a touch of disappointment. They were expecting to run into Elio and Oliver and see what happened to them. And I'm saying to myself, there's nothing that can happen to them. They've already had their conversation. They've confessed their love to each other. They've consummated their love. What else can happen? Okay. Oliver can leave his wife. He can cannot make up his mind whether to do so or not, but there's really nothing much of a story. People were expecting something, and so the initial disappointment was quite striking, but then they all write and they all tell me, initially I was disappointed, but then I got sold by the story, and actually I found it, some people say they found it more moving than the original Call Me by Your Name, because it also addresses questions about time, the fear of dying too soon, the fact of not living the right life, which is something that is a haunting topic in the book about, Oliver feels that he's not led his life. He's led another life. That wasn't his life. And the father feels the same way. And so does Miranda's father. He feels that I missed my chance. And this is a topic that you'll find in many, many writers. The sense that life can offer you many distractions, and they will take you away from what your real purpose is, your real life. And sometimes we think we know what our real life is, and we're mistaken yet again.
Yeah, yeah. Call Me by Your Name's interspersed with that notion of time and that fluidity of it, mostly through the lens of young love and infatuation. But in Find Me, the fluidity definitely feels, in my opinion, a bit more explicit, not only through love and infatuation, but themes you've mentioned: time, sexuality, feelings of youth, death, age, lost love, career. How intentional was it to make that switch, or did you feel like it was a switch when you were sort of approaching it?
But you know what? There's the thing again, and I don't mean to harp on this, but
Mhm.
you're assuming that I made a decision. As I'm writing, we're going to visit the father. The father's opening the door. There's a dog that comes in. And basically, I'm writing what the father's going to say. I have no idea what he's going to say. He's basically, I'm improvising as I'm going along. And what the irony is that as I'm writing, I'm feeling, maybe I'm not going to cut any of this out. It's okay. It makes sense. I didn't plan it, but it makes perfect sense. And I love this about writing, when sometimes you don't have to struggle to see how it's going to fit together. What's the message being sent? It's basically a conversation that happens haphazardly at a lunch table between father, Sammy, and Miranda. They're all three sitting there. And they say, bring in this. And she says, I've got two hands, guys, that sort of thing. I love these moments. Basically, my whole writing is really a distraction from the peanut gallery. I love the peanut gallery, the people who just basically chat and don't say anything that's going to be meaningful to the story.
Well, then I'm curious. How do your editors sort of work with you on through this process? It feels very fluid for yourself as you're going through the process. And what is that relationship like when you are working to solidify what that final story is going to
Well,
be?
I've had many kinds of editors. Some are what I call surgical. In other words, they say, look, this has to be moved here. This you can throw away because we get it. It's not necessary. We need to sort of shift these two scenes around because that's going to make them more powerful. Then you have editors who say, that part, particularly the part in Rome in Call Me by Your Name, it's just too long. You were enjoying yourself, I understand, but it's too long, and frankly, it's unnecessary. Okay. I mean, you have to be also the kind of writer who says, you got a point, you're right. I know it was going on for too long. And then you have editors who basically are very, very aggressive. This word is wrong. That particular scene is wrong. This is not good. This has to be changed. How about saying what you said before, what you told me on the telephone yesterday? Why don't you put that here? There are people like this. So there are all kinds of editors, but my fundamental editor, who is the chief editor at FSG, is very laissez-faire. So do what you feel is right for the book. This may be too long. This may be overly. This may be kind of unnecessary, but otherwise, do some trimming here and there as you feel fine. And I like that. He's the person I went to when I had written the peach scene, which you all know about. And I had written it because I was having fun with it. And I was going to cut it out because, come on, you're not going to publish a book by a professor with a peach scene. Come on, seriously. And so I told my editor, we can eliminate now that you've seen the manuscript, we can eliminate. He says, no, that peach scene has to stay. I said, oh, you think it does, really? What will my students think? And I was always thinking of my graduate students who are in their sort of middle 20s, late 20s. I'm here discussing Hegel and Kant with them, and they're going to think he's written the peach scene. I've always been tormented by that.
I'm sure that those questions still continue to surround you as well.
Yes, they do. They still do. But I'm very happy that the editor was so generous. Actually, this is what it is,
Yeah.
And tolerant of what I was doing.
In my experience, the most effective diversity and inclusion leaders are able to understand the desires and motivations of the people with whom they're working. As an author, how do you approach that process of putting yourself sort of in the shoes of the character?
So far, it has not been difficult. I just finished and sold a novella written from the point of view of a woman who's young and beautiful and the whole thing. And you put yourself there because you say, is this something that you don't ask yourself that question? It comes instinctively. You feel that this person is going to say this, but is not going to say that because that feels just shallow and wrong. That's as far as I go. But I follow my instinct. I really do have an instinct. I don't know that it's the right instinct. I mean, half the time I may be wrong, but I just follow it. I mean, here I have I am in my middle 50s and I'm writing about a kid who's, very young, and I'm not supposed to know what he's feeling, but I do know what he's feeling. I can even anticipate what he's feeling, not because I remember, but because I'm just projecting myself into his identity. And I think that that's what a writer does, and that's what all actors are supposed to do. You basically, you erase yourself and you become that person.
What's been the biggest distraction to that writing process, and what are ways that you've been able to combat that?
I don't combat it. I love email. I get many emails. I love getting emails. I love getting phone calls. Nobody calls you anymore. They send you texts. Text means that you have to answer in text form, and I hate text form because it means that you have to be very sort of brief, and I like to sort of expand. And plus, texts are messy by general. You're not careful about what you say, but I love being interrupted because fundamentally, as a writer, you're alone all the time, and I'm not exactly, because of my father, I'm not exactly proud of being so alone all day long. I wish I had a more social life. I mean, I do have friends and I love my friends, but at the same time, during the day, from whenever I get up to dinner time, I'm alone. And I get bored by myself. I don't watch TV. Basically, I don't do anything, and I don't even read that much. So basically, I love being interrupted. So, I used to go to a gym every morning. Now I can't go to the gym. I used to get haircuts. I can't get a haircut. You also meeting a friend just for a walk is no longer that feasible anymore because the friend has to come from far away, or I have to go and meet him and we can do a little walk and so forth. So, but I do like interruptions because I don't like to be so solitary in my cocoon. It's not what I'm proud of.
Speaking of not being in your cocoon, in Call Me by Your Name, Elio mentions Oliver's bookstore manners, and one of the readers had a question. What are your bookstore manners? Do you have any independent bookshops that you like to frequent when you're home or traveling?
Well, in New York, you can't because there are no bookstores. There's a Barnes and Nobles. There's a couple of bookstores, and plus, when you're an author and you walk into a bookstore, if they recognize you, there's already sort of some kind of there's an attitude that you feel right away, and especially in a small bookstore. But there are fantastic bookstores in America. I mean, and I've had to travel to them, like Boswell's in Milwaukee, Powell's in Portland, Elliott Bay in Seattle. I can list them all because they've been fantastic to me, and they're wonderful to walk through, and just to watch so many books that you will never read for the rest of your life. But it's always a temptation to say, my God, I wish I had the time to read all these books. But I used to go to bookstores, and I had a very, very small, meager allowance when I was a teenager. And I would buy one book a week. I couldn't afford more than that. And it was a cheap paperback. But I would always buy a book every week, and I would read that book during the whole week. Which I like to do. And so you go to a bookstore, you look at various books, you have a sense of what's a serious book and what's not a serious book. You want to read the serious book, but you leaf through other things, and eventually you buy one, and you become friendly with the owner of the bookstore because they know you, you know them, and sometimes they'll make a recommendation, and sometimes they will let you do what you want to do. I mean, I've lived in bookstores, so I love bookstores. But in New York nowadays, you can't go to a bookstore. There are no bookstores.
Yeah, speaking of book recommendations, do you have any Egyptian contemporary literature recommendations that you would have?
Yeah, there's one author who's becoming very famous. I think he lives in New York now, or in Brooklyn, because he's basically doesn't want to go back to Egypt. It's become impossible. And his name is Al-Aswani. and he wrote a book called The Jacobian Building, which was made into a film, a very successful film. And now he's coming out with another book called the Republic of Half Truths, of something like that. The Republic of something Truths, and I'm reading that actually because it was sent to me, as an advanced copy, and it's very good. I mean, this is good stuff. This is very solid stuff, and I'm happy that it exists. I don't expect people to write what I write because.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be all of us are very, very different writers, but I like the fact that some people are doing things that are totally different.
Yeah, speaking of different writers in the industry, a lot has come out recently about inequalities within the publishing industry, especially through the viral hashtag publishing paid me. What have your experiences
I don't
been
know
like?
what that is. I don't know what is that hashtag.
Guinevere?
Yeah, so it was on Twitter. A number of authors were talking about the discrepancy in pay and advances, specifically for authors of color. It was part of what was going on during some of the Black Lives Matter protests in recent weeks. And it brought up a good point about how publishing as an industry has a lot of work to do in terms of representation and and equality and equity.
I'm sure they do. I mean, I know that they pay huge advances to writers who are going to remunerate the publisher. I mean, you look at, I don't know how many millions of dollars, Obama is going to make. And we know that Clinton made a fortune but these are sort of stellar people who will get an amazing advance. But there are also the small ones, the ones who are lucky enough to get even published and get 2,000 copies made. I know, I was one of them too. It's very hard. It's very hard. And so, yes, I do understand that some people are basically, how do you say, almost dismissed by the publishing industry and then allowed in a trickle, which I think is unfair. But I also understand what the publisher is doing. I mean, they want to give huge advances, which sometimes they don't even reap from the profit of the book, and if she feels it's a safe bet, like I'm sure that if you take a famous movie actor wrote a book, it would sell millions. And look at those, what's his name, the man who was working for Trump and then wrote that book a few weeks ago, I forget his name.
John Bolton.
Tom Bolton.
Bolton. Yes, I forget everybody's name. Bolton wrote. I mean, he was #1 on the Amazon bestseller list. It was a great idea to have him publish the book. I don't know if it's a good book or bad book, but that's it. Mm-hmm. But I understand that other people are basically having a very hard time getting their manuscript looked at.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen any of that change though over your time in the industry? And what changes would you like to see in the future?
No, I think that the changes are in the opposite direction. I mean, I'm the founder of something called the Writers Institute, where we accept, sometimes 24 people every year to come and basically workshop their material with editors. That's what that's what the promise of the institute is. What I find, however, is that now many editors will not look at a manuscript unless it's been already vetted by an agent. When I submitted my material, I sent it myself.
Yeah.
Those days are gone. Now you need to have an agent to represent you and to edit you before you even you meet the possible editor. So I'm sorry, you need to have an agent to represent you with an editor. And so most of the editing is done by the agent themselves, not even by the editor sometimes. So what you're having is that whereas in the old days you could send your manuscript, it would get into the slush pile, but eventually somebody would read it. Now it won't even get looked at unless it comes with a cover letter from an agent.
And your project aims to change that?
We try, because we have people who are of all races and of all ages, especially. We have people who come in at the age in their middle 20s, and then we've had some fantastic writers who are in their 70s. And in the group, they all become very friendly. They have dinners together. They go on having dinners years later as well. But what I like is that you get this sense of a diversity of population, of various writers coming from totally different backgrounds who meet in this one room. And basically, the purpose of the meeting is not that they're all of the same age and all went to Ivy League schools and blah, 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 the same exact trajectory. They come from different walks of life. Most of them work during the day. They have totally different kinds of jobs, but they want to write. And that's the only thing that animates them during those 2 hours that they sit in the workshop.
Absolutely. And on that theme of diversity of experience, given recent events, I think a lot of people right now are really struggling to find out personal things that ring true to them and finding some kind of personal identity.
Right.
And as someone who's spoken out about the ambiguity of his own life experiences and finding that place of belonging, what advice would you have for people beginning that journey?
To belong, I'm sorry, what advice I have to give to people who are trying to do what
Just
precisely?
figure out how they belong or find some kind of identity.
Well, I mean, you're talking to the wrong person. I come from a country that was never my homeland. I was born there, but I didn't belong there. I was in the wrong religion in the wrong country. I became an Italian citizen by pure happenstance. I lived in Italy, but I was never Italian. I was supposed to be French, but I was never French. I came to America as an immigrant, and as an Italian immigrant, I was never Italian. I was not even practicing Jew. I hate religions. I don't even like nationalities or identities. And it explains a bit why most of my characters seem to be sort of not only fluid in their identity, but they can't even be rooted anywhere and or have even a native tongue, because that has been my experience. Everything is so transient in my life that for me to speak about identity is to speak about something I don't understand. I wish I had an identity. I wish I had a nationality, but I don't.
But I think a number of people have found solace and comfort in the way you've described just things in general, notwithstanding, not feeling like you have that identity.
Well, because I think that, well, it takes a lot of, I'll be honest, I think it takes a lot of boldness to begin saying to people things that they've always kind of suspected about themselves, but never really wanted to think about it. And you put it out there in a very tactful, because my writing is very tactful, but at the same time, it's quite in the gut. It hits you in the gut. It's supposed to. And so I do both things. And at the same time, people feel that this man, and they've said this to me so many times, you've written my life. You've captured all my feelings of, most of us are not exactly happy with who we are. We're disenchanted. We don't always belong to the circle that we think we ought to belong to. Many of us feel that I was born in the wrong family. These are not my real parents. My real parents, I don't know who they are, but they could be better than those. Or my brother or my sister, my siblings, they're all wrong for me. My school is wrong. And I think that when you write from my perspective, where everything is put to the question, it hits people hard because it makes them feel, I'm not crazy. In other words, I've written for these. I don't mean to write for them. I write about what I think is true for most people. And it takes courage, and at the same time, it takes imagination to go into areas that maybe I haven't lived, but at the same time, I can understand them. And people write to me the most amazing emails. I get them at work, which is not exactly where I want to get my emails, but that's where I get them. And they're amazing. I mean, some people spend, days writing to me, saying basically, you've explained me to myself. And I don't think I'm presumptuous enough to do any of that. But somehow, inadvertently, I do it.
Well, I love how you're able to tell these stories without actually telling the story. These individual words, these pauses, the glances, everything in your writing has meaning. And the subtleties in particular in language really matter. as someone who speaks multiple languages and has such a broad experience, how does that experience factor in how you write in English?
Well, I'm going to cheat. I went to British school all through my childhood. I was put in an English school, even though I wanted to go to a French school. But my father said, "I'm going to go to an English school instead." And I argued when I was a kid. But I went to English school, so I read English poetry, and I always felt that English was a foreign language to me. I still feel that. And yet English is the language I know best. I'm most comfortable in English. And yet it's not my mother tongue. I could never speak to my mom in English. She wouldn't understand me. She's dead now, but she wouldn't have understood me. But it meant a lot to me that the language that is the most sincere for me is the one that I have acquired artificially by going to school. But that's the story of my life, as you probably gathered by now. The things that are most sort of rooted in me are grafted. They're not rooted in me. They're just grafted. But my whole identity is grafted on me. My whole life. I could be living an entirely different life, a better one. Who knows? But this is the one I'm living. I could be writing different books, but those are the ones that I'm writing. I don't mean to exaggerate, but.
No, that's great. And when you are exploring sort of these themes, how yeah, there is a bit of a, I think, a disconnect and something you've been able to embrace within yourself. And as a reader, I certainly have read passages of yours where it definitely hit home to me. And I wonder sort of how do you, I don't know how you have to be aware of that, right?
Of what? Of what exactly? Of the fact that
that although you don't have this identity and you feel like you've kind of been spread through and that you're
right.
writing sort of more fluid, that it really does have an impact on the reader and it really does touch readers in this very intrinsically human way.
Well, because I mean, I try to write things that I don't write things that will sound true because that's totally artificial. I write things that move me or that excite me or that even turn me on. I have to be sort of aroused, and I use the word generically, by what I'm writing. I have to be, there are moments, in fact, when I was writing Call Me By Your Name, especially, where towards the end, I was thinking back of an experience that I've had that was totally different, but that was very moving. And I was writing to that experience while writing about Elio and Oliver. It was totally different. But I was moved when I was writing it. And I stayed with feeling moved. I wanted to be moved because you want to be constantly aroused by what you're writing. If you're not aroused, then don't write. Okay, then you're just doing sort of clerical work. I used to tell my sons when they were writing for school, I said, every sentence that you write has to have a pearl in it. It's like an oyster. You have to have a pearl in every sentence. If you can't do it in every sentence, do it at least in this short paragraph. You need to have that thing that is going to be there, that's going to radiate either sensuality or emotion or something, but it has to radiate. And I try to stay with that if I can. You try not to skid away from that because then you become artificial.
Yeah, so you really are leaning into these emotions, and a reader asked, how do you actually explore those emotions so vividly?
I don't know. I mean, it's very hard to say. I mean, it's not that I don't start weeping. In fact, I made the faux pas once of saying, I don't understand why people cry at the end of Call Me By Your Name, because I didn't cry. I didn't even get close to crying. But I can see that it sort of got very, very close to being quite emotionally impactful, even for me. But I didn't go to that distance. It never, partly because as a writer, you're always thinking, are there too many adverbs, too many prepositions? So you're also thinking of matters of syntax, of grammar, and of style as you're trying to contain an emotion. And you try not to give it too much. You want to sort of sometimes not insult the reader by explaining too much what's going on. Let the reader infer it. And so whatever you wrote was not good enough. Now you erase it so that it's now slightly ambiguous, but the reader will get it. I think that the example I would like to give, if I may, is the example of when Elio tells Oliver that he's attracted to him. He never tells him, I'm attracted to you, I have feelings for you, I may even love you. He never says anything like that. He says something that's so ambiguous that Oliver is not sure he understands. And I'm sure that the reader is not sure that he or she understands. But they begin to get it at some point.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a confession. You don't want to sort of hit the so. And as I was writing, I was going for that emotion without explaining too much.
So did the popularity of Call Me by Your Name in the film influence the writing of Find Me? Was there a lot of pressure for you?
No, not at all.
Okay.
No, in fact, there was, people always say, well, has the movie had an impact on you? I said it had one impact only. I needed to give Samuel a name. And I wasn't going to give him a different name than the one in the movie. So I borrowed the one that Luca Guadagnino and James Ivory had. It was Samuel, fine, I'll call him Samuel too. That was it. That I didn't want to go to the movie. And in fact, the movie did not entice me. What it did do, however, it reminded me, because I'm a very insecure writer, I'm as insecure as Elio is insecure. I felt that the movie meant that people did like my story. They do like what I'm doing. And that's a kind of boost that it gave me, which I'm very grateful. But I didn't imitate the movie at all.
Yeah.
And it had no impact whatsoever. And I don't know that it will ever, that Find Me will ever be made into a movie.
Yeah, I find when people call it sequel, I don't like that term myself personally. It doesn't feel correct. It's just a different journey and a different, it's just very different. In Find Me, you have a sense of watching Mr. Perlman being challenged to follow his own advice to, in Find Me, did you have a sense of watching Mr. Perlman being challenged to follow his own advice to Elio in Call Me by Your Name?
In fact, Elio, at some point towards the very end of that segment, tells him, Dad, I've never seen you like this. This is wonderful. I don't remember exactly the word, but he might also say, don't ruin it.
Yes,
okay?
Yes.
So what you have is you have a kind of reverse conversation. I didn't want to have the son give his father the equivalent of the speech that the father had given him 10 years earlier. But I did want the son to sort of telegraph to the father that this is wonderful. The father himself is kind of doesn't believe this is happening. And I think that we're all like that. Whenever something starts in our lives, we don't really believe that this person is serious. I remember when I used to get telephone numbers of people when I was in college. I would never want to put that telephone number in my notebook because I figured this is not going to happen. There's no point in keeping that number. And I was also superstitious. So you don't write something down because then you're saying it's going to happen. And I didn't want to think that. But in essence, the father is reluctant. He doesn't believe that she's attracted. He can't believe that she's attracted. And he basically says, I'm going to go back to my hotel. Thank you very much for the ride or for the lunch, but it's time to separate. And she won't let him.
But what I love about the way you approached that was that we get that first person point of view from Samuel, and we understand kind of his apprehension and the complexity of this relationship. And then we also get the chance to see a third party person describe their first person point of view of this is happy, this is love, this makes me excited for you. There's a context switch that happens there that I think is very beautiful in seeing what love can do to a relationship.
Well, I think that all love, if you think about it, it doesn't always grow out of getting to know someone and getting to like them and then that sort of thing. It happens suddenly. You know it right away. if you don't know it, then what are you thinking? Okay. You know right away that you were attracted. And it's not, I don't mean physical attraction. I mean that you are sort of, what a nice person. Nice. I want to get to know this person better, but something is already established. And I think this is what happens on the train. She realizes he's special, and he realizes that she's very special. And he wants to say goodbye, and she won't let him. She finds that there's something going on between them that she doesn't understand, but she wants more of it. And she tells him so. And I happen to love her. I think she's an amazing character.
I agree. I loved the again the thought process that goes in and how we ascribe what someone else may be thinking about us versus the interplay just in trying to get to know someone new as well, in any relationship, whether it be the beginning, the middles, or the ends. Like it all of it has meaning in different ways, and a lot of it plays on how we relate to what we think that person might be thinking as well. It's done in such a beautiful way. I loved seeing that throughout these the chapters in Find Me.
Yeah, it happens fast. And some people have said, God, come on, it can't happen in one day or in half a day. Things do happen sometimes in life, as we all know, really fast. I remember once I was riding the subway and I started speaking to this girl who was basically was very crowded. And we were speaking to each other, and we were exchanging sort of important information about our lives on the IRT, the number 2 train, you know, and of course I had to get off. She went on, and I said to myself, I should ask her for her phone number, but I didn't. And I basically, that's something we all do. And you say, why didn't I ask? I will never meet her again. And this was absolutely wonderful. So I do believe in instant attraction, instant interest in someone. I mean, I like to use the word about someone. Someone is actually interesting, not in that bland way in which you say this movie was kind of interesting, but it was actually stupid. Okay, but when you find someone who's actually interesting, that is a magnificent thing.
Yeah. And I think that you hit on that theme very well in Find Me, in that these it's interesting to hear critics talk about or as you mentioned, some critics talk about just this couldn't happen in this time frame. But I think the whole goal of kind of those stories is to show you, like, there's parallel time exists. So it could have happened. It's these what if moments that you kind of build up for yourself sometimes. It's oftentimes nice just to reflect on that and think about that and how these small moments can possibly turn into something or nothing at the same time.
Both are options. But there are people, I mean, I've always envied people like this who know how to capitalize on these moments. They know how to take advantage. I envy them. I always say, well, you know, this person is going to think that I'm really going too far and I'm exaggerating, blah, blah, blah. I better not. And so you sort of slink away, sort of somewhat defeated and going against everything that you wanted.
Absolutely. We have about 5 minutes left on this chat, and we have a couple of questions here coming in. What are the books you can read over and over again? Books that you could recommend that are deeply rooted in your heart?
Oh God, they're always the same ones, unfortunately.
Oh, that's great.
Because they made my life. They made my life possible because they taught me things. One of them is a book by Dostoevsky called The Idiot. Partly because I thought I was the idiot. Okay? Some people have called me that. That's okay. But no, because he has a very weird personality. And I've always thought of myself as being fundamentally weird. I mean, I know how to pretend I'm normal. I think this is what we all do. All humanity is basically in the business of pretending to be sane. But we know we're just exhausting ourselves with the pretense. But anyway, The Idiot was a very important book for me. It's very long, but I loved it. And then there's another book that I've also read. They're all classics, and nothing is contemporary. The Red and the Black, because I thought that the examination of this character's psyche is amazing and unrelenting. And I love that. So The Red and Black, The Idiot. My favorite book of all time is still The Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. It's written by a general about the Greek war between Athens and Sparta. And it reads like the biggest tragedy you'll ever read, because humanity is fundamentally stupid. And one stupid mistake can basically aggregate on many other stupid mistakes. And humanity is proud of itself. And so on. And I mean, there are some other books, and I also changed my mind. And of course, people know that I like Proust a lot, because I don't think I would be writing if hadn't read Proust at a very young age. He taught me basically how to ignore so many things and stay focused on what goes on in our minds. That's really what interests me. And you will see that all the books I've mentioned so far are books about motivation. What is it that motivates people to do or say smart or stupid things that they do?
Yeah. As someone in diversity and inclusion, that motivation hits very hard for me. Having people sort of lean into things they know and don't know, and then also just setting realistic expectations about humanity and how humanity can oftentimes and also oftentimes does not, more often than not, step up. Or do you think you're completely sort of, what do you think about these characters now? Are these in the future? Is there do you have any thought process around where these stories could possibly go in the future? Or what are your thoughts around that?
I don't know. I might. I love those two characters. I love each one of them. I love their love for each other. I think it is an amazing love. I think they're also wonderful as characters. You will notice if you read any of my books, most of the people in my books are all very nice. They're kind people. They're generous. They're understanding. There's got a lot of humanity in them. And Elio and Oliver are amazingly human as people. And it's hard to abandon them. On the other hand, you sometimes say to yourself, okay, enough. I've written 2 books about them. I've also written another book called Enigma Variations, which has a lot of Elio in it. And maybe it's time to stop, but I cannot guarantee that I will. At some point, I may wake up one morning and say, I want to go back to that house. I want to sort of meet the characters again. Yes, Elio is still young and Oliver is just finishing his dissertation. I want to start it all over again. I don't know what I might do.
Excellent. And on that note, I think we are rounding out our entire time. I want to thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And for everyone on there, just have both books here. Highly recommend reading and rereading. And also downloading Armie Hammer's reading of the Call Me By Your Name. Excellent addition to that. So thank you, André.
Thank you so much, all of you. I only see a mosaic of faces, but you're all wonderful. I mean, it's lovely seeing all of you, really it is. And there are many more pages, I know, than my screen can contain, but I'm very happy. All the best to everyone.
So if anybody has their book with them on their desk and want to hold it up, we will do a little screenshot for posterity here.
Oh my God.
And while we're doing that, I just want to note that we will be uploading the recording and we'll email it out to everybody. All right, I'm going to pause and everybody smile, hold your books, say hello.
Oh my God, look at you guys. It's amazing.
This is my favorite part of the whole night.
I didn't know you did that, but that's wonderful.
Oh my gosh. Thank you to everyone who came. We also will be drawing our winner to win a full collection of André's books from Picador. So check your emails tomorrow. André, thank you so much. You sort of wrapped up talking about your characters being kind and generous. And I think that you were just an exemplar of the best of your writing here with us tonight. I mean, certainly you gave us a lot of things to think about, so much insight into your work, and you succeeded at being truly interesting. So
thank you all so very much. It's really a pleasure to have spoken, and thank you, Matthew, very, very much for your generosity. It takes a lot of generosity to interview someone and not to sort of intrude on them. I find it very difficult to do when I have to interview an author. I want to talk about myself.
Yes, Matthew, we are so grateful to
Yeah.
you. We're so grateful to all of the readers who submitted questions and comments in the chat. Everybody stay safe. Please wear your mask, protect yourselves, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. We have some more authors coming up, so check our website, and thanks to everybody. Take
Thank
care.
you again.
Good
Thank you.
night.
Do I leave? Do I press?
I'll shut it down.
Okay, okay, fine.
Bye-bye.